Hello, everybody, again. It's me and Jimmy. We decided to come back after our discussion last week. And for those of you that didn't have a chance to see that, basically what we did is I have a couple of videos out that we're making the claims that Christian morality must be subjective on the first one. And the second one, it tries to demonstrate that your decision-making process through a Christian filter would make it basically impossible to make an ethical determination if something was ethical or not. And we discussed that. Great conversation. Jimmy's great sport to be here again. I've got it cut up to the first hour because that's kind of what we really, or hour and a half, I think, posted on my channel. And I'm thinking Jimmy did the same thing on his. But we're going to kind of flip the script tonight. And tonight's going to be Jimmy has his chance to examine at least my morality from a secular standpoint and see how it stands up to the, kind of the same scrutiny that I put Christian morality through. And with that, I'm going to let Jimmy reintroduce himself for you guys who weren't here last week or anybody that's catching this late. Jimmy, thanks for coming again.
Ned, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's you call me a good sport for being here, but this is a great pleasure for me. So yeah, my name is Jimmy Stevens. I'm just another Christian, very interested in philosophy and theology. Epistemology is much more my strong suit, but I think that for the sake of conversation, I can hold my ground and hopefully offer some challenges to Ned's position, but we'll see. Maybe I'll learn a thing or two. I'll probably learn a lot about utilitarianism, as I think, Ned, that's the overall category that you're coming here with. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope so, because like last week, I learned from you, and I think that's the best way that we can, kind of exchange ideas and at least get closer to truth and figure out, if either of us has any clue at all. But hopefully between the two of us, we could figure some stuff out. I guess with that said, you want me to go ahead and just jump into kind of what my morals and ethics and all of that stem from, and where we're kind of give you a foundation plus the audience, even though we did touch it a little bit last week, but not nearly enough.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I don't want to, the thing that I want to avoid most of all is misrepresenting you. So.
Oh yeah, and I think like last week, I think we did a pretty good job of not doing the little straw manning and that type of thing. I mean that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, is we both seem to be honestly trying to figure each other out, and that I think that's the best way to go about it. As far as morals and ethics, my belief is that, number one, they're very personal, in that every person is going to base what they feel on their independent goals, just like pretty much anything out there. And morals and ethics in particular, without a goal, you're not going to be able to have a test to determine if your actions or beliefs are going to get you toward that goal, or even allow you to in any way, shape, or form attain that goal. So the way I see it is that my goals stem from looking at nature, looking at how nature works, and then determining what I feel is the best course for my children, my and to be absolutely honest, I mean, that's where it's going to stem from, at least from, again, in my opinion, the human perspective, is we are herd animals. We are group. We have evolved to where living in a group allows us to succeed. We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. We don't do well when pitted with just about any animal on the planet. Even animals smaller than us will really make things pretty bad for a human one-on-one and without any kind of advantage to the human. And what I mean by that is an ability to use tools or make things. Just if it's mano a mano and tooth and nail, we don't do real well against the vast majority of the animals. So the only way that humanity has been able to get, I don't even say a foothold, but a complete dominance over everything else in the world is because we work as a community. We work together. Now, seeing that and believing that that is the best way for my children to propagate and continue on with the species, that's my test. Is, in short, if I look at an action and I say, okay, if we take this action and we expand it throughout society and we make it a cultural norm, what would happen to society? Would society benefit from that and become stronger and be able to better sustain the people that lives in that society? Or would it be detrimental and starts to tear down society, erode it, and we start to, at the best, break back into small clans, and therefore most of the stuff that we have been able to be so successful with would evaporate. I feel like I missed a lot there, but I think that's a decent starting point. Jimmy, would you like to kind of start picking that apart, or do you want me to clarify anything? I mean, I feel like I was really random and all over the place there, so I apologize to begin with.
Oh, no, I mean, like you said, broad strokes. We're just introducing things here. So let's see if I can't ask some questions to try to better understand the view, because you can't really critique something. I mean, you can't even know that something disagrees with you unless you understand it first. So,
all right.
I guess the most obvious question to me, there's a lot of questions here. If I had to categorize everything, there seems to be questions about what is the nature of the reality that we're talking about. Like for example, you say you look to nature, and this sort of has information that is apt to tell us things about ethics. So a question might be about metaphysics. What is the nature of the reality that we're in that allows for the possibility of these ethical situations?
I mean,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that, and again, getting to know me, I am as pure a naturalist as you're probably going to run into, at least to a very, very big degree. So I do look at it from, and feel free to quote me on this. I know a lot of people hate this saying, and I tend to hate the saying, but it's Kent Hovind's favorite saying. If we came from rocks, we started from basic, just primordial nothingness, and have evolved to consciousness, at least what we believe is consciousness. As far as what allows for that, I would say the underpinning laws of physics. What allows for the laws of physics? I am, at least at the current time, I am a string theory guy. I mean, me and Lawrence Krauss have had a couple of discussions on that, I know he's not, and we disagree, but again, I like Lawrence. He's a great guy too. But I am a string guy, and I am a multiverse guy. And what that gets you is at least, and you don't even have to be a string guy, you can just get to multiverse and it'll get you there. That if, given enough pocket universes with different potential, I use this again broadly, laws of physics, there's going to be, through just sheer probability or possibility and probability, you're going to get a universe like ours. And why we're here is because we happen to reside in one of these pocket universes that allow for life, allow for stars, allow for matter and everything else to exist. Did that get you there, or do you need more on that?
No, that's okay. So it sounds to me like the metaphysic that's going on behind this is some sort of physicalism, right? Would it be appropriate to say that this view of the universe is that there is nothing beyond matter in motion.
Right. Yeah. As far as anything supernatural or anything outside the natural, the closest I would come to, I guess, moving away from a pure naturalistic state would be, oh, simulation theory, to where we could be in a computer. I think that has some very interesting just possibilities out there. And it's actually becoming a very serious field of study. There's quite a few mathematicians and physicists that are doing research to try to see if there's even a possibility of figuring out if we are literally just a simulation. Which, again, I would go that way much quicker than I would go for some supernatural deity type creation event.
Okay. So as far as the laws of the universe, or actually, let me back up here real quick. This is the way it might be useful to phrase it. It seems to me that, on your point of view, when you're talking about an object in reality, you are talking about what's the right word here? You're talking about atomistic substances or compositions of those atomistic substances and general laws that are just properties of those substances, right?
Yeah, so, and what's amazing is if you have a chance, and again, physics is my deal, so I think it's cool and it's something I like to play with. But if you look, you can take a simulation and just have very few constraints, very few rules, and get very lifelike behaviors out of it. In fact, you can do something as simple as in your own house. Just play with soap bubbles and just what happens with water and surface tension with just vinegar, water, soap, like dishwashing soap. You get movement. You can get certain behaviors that would mimic life. And then you take it just a couple of more, give those benign, completely independent chemicals just a couple of more attributes, which again, they're not life in any way, shape, or form. No one would define this as life. But what it looks like is they chase each other, they eat each other, they will seek energy sources, they will avoid what look like predatory behavior, and this is all just pure chemistry. There's nothing behind it other than physics and chemistry causing this stuff. So when we can get to that level and get that kind of mimicry of life, to me, it's not that big of a stretch to say that, given the right conditions, given enough time, that we would get something that would not only mimic life, but would move from that just pure chemical state into a living state. So, and again, why? I mean, do we know that? Absolutely not. Abiogenesis, we don't know it. But 200 years ago, we didn't know what lightning was either. So,
okay, so as far as this point of view, how would you escape the trouble of fatalism, which is the idea that one's choices, right? When you were talking earlier about having goals and making choices that are informed by these goals, how do those not lose value in light of the fact that everything reduces to these substances and their causal properties?
Well, because I think that, and that's a great question. It's something that I struggled with a long time. I don't know if I may have mentioned this before, but I don't know. I actually went to Oral Roberts University for a while. Wasn't the best experience, as you probably can imagine. But that was one of the things that I struggled with there, is that if we are in a purely naturalistic state, and we are going to either end in, back in those days, I'm dating myself now, but back in those days, one of the leading proponents for the end of the universe would be the Big Crunch, and now it looks like we're just going to basically fizzle out in a huge, just a complete heat death. We're just going to keep expanding to the point where it for the most part, atoms will be so far apart that they won't even be able to interact with each other. So, what does it mean? If that's really the ending of all of this, then why do I care about anything? And it probably took a decade or so, but struggling with this, what I came to the realization of, and I'd like to say that it was purely mine, but it's not. It was lots of people, helping me get there, books and just all kinds of other things. But what I came to realize is that the value that we place on life is self placed. There doesn't need to be an external source for my life to have value. Now, I hope it does. I hope that the people around me, the people that love me, the people that, my kids, my wife, my family, my friends, my students, they think I'm valuable and they value my life through that. But I don't have a problem with not having a grand plan. In fact, what not having a grand plan or an infinite existence does is it makes my life more valuable. And every minute, every second that I'm living it at least should inspire me. I mean, of course, none of us do this, but it should inspire me to live those seconds with the realization that I can't get them back. And if I'm fortunate enough to get 70, 80, 90, 100 years, whatever I get, at that time, I'm done. And, my legacy hopefully will reside in some of my work, or at least my kids, and, that type of thing. But as far as a personal meaning, a personal, for lack of a better term, just a personal meaning for my existence, it's purely internal. It makes life is wonderful because I value it. And in my opinion, when religions give a promise of an eternal existence, in a lot of cases, it takes away from those people's lives. Not so much that they don't enjoy their lives, but there may be time that was spent doing things that they would have chosen not to do if they weren't religious. And that waste of that moment, that waste of that day, week, year, whatever it is gone forever. And if I happen to be right, now they're not going to know it because they'll be dead and it'll be all over with. But the problem is in reality, they would have, again, in my opinion, wasted that time. That time is gone. So the value that my life inherits from this belief is amazing. I mean, when I get to see something new, when I get to learn something new, it's cool because I use that time wisely, in my opinion. I use that time to do something. It had value. It was interesting. And if I happen to be lucky enough to make a discovery or do something else, even better, because other people will learn from what I got to do. Is it at the end fatalistic? Yeah. I mean, but again, it doesn't bother me that at the end of the day, everything will be either radiated into nothingness, or if something changes and we figure out that it is a cyclic universe to where we crunch and bang over and over, at the end, it's the same thing. We're going to, all of the information, all of the stuff that we have done will be, not for lack of a better term, specifically, it will be lost. And I do understand that some people have a very hard time accepting that fact. But once I realized that, it was like a light going off, is that, oh my, I've got a limit to this. I better get out and do something cool. I better quit wasting my life. I better have fun. I better do things that are meaningful, because this is it. So I hope that helped and I didn't ramble too much.
Well, I think it gives me a good look into the viewpoint. So I appreciate all that you said there. I think there's sort of two issues here. So fatalism can be stated. How do I confront this issue? Okay, the objection of fatalism to any sort of ethical framework can be phrased in the way that it is in Ecclesiastes, where we have this end before us, and any route that we conceptualize, any sort of way to that end, any set of events that leads to that conclusion that we can conjure in our minds, would become empty on this argument because of the fact that it leads to the same result. If I choose to go out and have fun, or if I don't choose to go out and have fun, I will still be dead. That is certainly one type of fatalistic argument, and I do think it would hold as a predicament for this sort of point of view. But I was actually going from the other direction. The objection that seems to me to apply here, based on the physicalism, is this: if if everything that I do, my behavior, my choices, simply belongs to the divisions of my being, molecules, then atoms, then parts of an atom, and so on and so forth. If that just goes down to the basic substances of these things and their properties, which cause them to act the way that they do, then I don't see what difference it would make to believe in this point of view versus not believing it. And furthermore, I don't see how it would even be effective to argue for it, because if another person disagrees with you, they have no ability not to disagree with you. It's simply in their chemistry, in their chemical makeup.
And see, I think
the things that they do.
Right, and while I grant that could be a sticking point, unless we had a species that the vast majority did happen to agree with what we would consider to be right and wrong. In short, and not so much right and wrong, but more importantly, the goals. If we go and we survey humans, now there are going to be outliers, and I'll admit that there's sociopaths and there's other people out there, but the vast majority of humanity, if you said, if there was an action that was going to bring an end to humanity, it was going to cause the destruction of the human species, would that be a good or a bad action? In short, is your goal as a human to continue the species for your children and for the people around you and all of that? The vast majority of humanity is going to say, yeah, I mean, we want to at least survive, if not thrive, and live happy, healthy, flourishing lives. So when we can get the vast majority, and I do mean vast, I'm talking 99 with 0.9s to many place values past that decimal. When we can get that kind of consensus on one goal, from that point, we can start developing tests on, okay, what actions are going to best facilitate achieving that goal? So when you say that it's meaningless, well, it's only meaningless in the sense that, yes, 20 billion years from now, our star is going to swell to the size, well, depending on where you're at, but most people feel that it's going to swell to the size of potentially our orbit, which would encompass the Earth, and the Earth no longer exists. So what does all this mean? Well, who knows? Maybe we've moved to the stars from there. Maybe we haven't. Maybe that is the end of humanity. But the point is that each individual life in between now and the end of humanity, whenever that is, because in my scenario, it is an inevitable occurrence. maybe, unless we can figure out multiverse and can move to a different universe. But as far as I can tell, it's going to happen. Humanity will end up dead, like you said. So what's the point in not, I don't know, being selfish now? Well, because I would not live a happy life being selfish. I would have heartburn over that. I would feel bad for the world I'm leaving my children, because they do have to live in this place, even after I'm gone, more than likely.
Can I interrupt you real quick, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, but what I'm pointing out is not so much the end being an inevitability. I do think that that's problematic. But what I'm trying to argue right now is when you talk about when you give these rationales as to why you would not do these things, what I'm saying is those reasons actually have no relevance given your metaphysic.
Well, they have,
because
but what you're missing is they have relevance to me. That's why I said this is all an internal test. Each one of us has to come to terms with what we do. Now, some of us, and I'm talking humanity, some of us don't have any type of moral compass. They are sociopaths. They have no empathy. They cannot feel what we feel as quote unquote normal humans do. Now, in those cases, that's problematic to say the least. And we've seen what happens because of that. But every other person, people that do have the capacity for empathy, people that do care about others, people that do care about their own well-being, and what I mean by that is how I view myself. When we look in the mirror, what do you see? And not physically, but actually as a person, how do I view myself ethically? That is the test. It's not an external test. It's not an external driver. Well, like Christianity. Christianity mandates things happen from an external source. My morality is internal, and what I argue for is everyone's is internal. It's kind of like the thing that most Calvinists do and say that everybody believes in God. Well, I believe everybody has some degree of ethical compass. Again, except for the outliers. But the key to this is that because of evolution, because of the way that life works, these beliefs, this capacity for empathy and the ability to work as a communal species has been, in my opinion, genetically implanted in us. That is something that we are, again, on the vast majority, born with. And therefore, our goals will reflect that genetic disposition. So it's not really a problem, because where we'll have outliers, we can test for that. And again, it's kind of sitting on that jury and going, you know what this person did, was it right or wrong? I'm going to convict them based on my perspective, on what I feel my moral test is. And, could I convict someone of marijuana possession, let's say, just possession? Probably not, because I don't see, even though the laws may say that, it's wrong and it's, in some cases it's a felony. Sorry. I don't feel the same. And again, I would probably, well, no, I wouldn't probably. I would, if I was asked to sit as a juror there, I would make that known before it ever started. And most likely the attorneys would dismiss me, if not the judge. But the point that I'm making is all of this has to start from an internal base. All of this has to be your filter, not some ethereal mandate from, any God. That's where my foundations rest. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I think there's a lot that could be said about this, but I really want to press home the point.
Okay.
I don't think that the externality or internality of the source or foundation for these values or evaluations or whatever they are is at stake here, or is informative to the objection that I'm trying to present at the table. What I'm saying is, given you have a metaphysic where people are simply the composition of subatomic particles and their properties, meaning my behavior is reducible to certain elements
Okay,
and their interactions.
I think I get where you're going, and
Okay, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Just to make sure I'm clear. What I'm saying is the difference between believing in your ethical point of view and not believing in it is not a rational difference. It's just an accident of chemistry on that perspective. There is no more reason to believe your point of view than not to believe it, given your metaphysic.
Well, but I think that one component I mean, and this is, again, this is the thing that I do have a problem with when we try to reduce it down to we came from rocks or we're nothing more than, a bag of chemistry going on. Because while that may be the machine, it is not the product. And what I mean by that is that there is, to use an old saying, the sum is greater than all of its parts. We are not just like a crystal. A crystal will grow, and from a lot of people's perspective, in fact, I'm pretty sure there's believers out there that do believe crystals have life force or whatever it's called. We're not that. We're not just a passive group of chemicals happening to be interacting. There is also a product from that. And that product is consciousness. So once we understand that what we're actually dealing with here is the effects on that consciousness, I can hurt my body. I can cut myself. I can, be tortured. I can whatever. But what the pain actually, the effect of the pain, although it may have some physical manifestations, the real effect of the pain is to my consciousness. That's where the crimes are committed. It's not against the flesh, if you want to use more scriptural type. It's more the soul. And even though I don't feel the soul is anything other than the product of these chemical interactions, it is still a product that needs to be taken into account and needs to be valued, because that is the essence of, in my opinion, humanity. In fact, if I were a brain in a vat, it really wouldn't change much as far as what crimes you would commit against me, because the inputs, if I don't have a hand, but you still cut it off and I feel that pain, that still affects my consciousness, even if the hand's not real. So the point is if we can look to ethics and the rules that we're going to live by, focused on how does that affect that consciousness, that product of these chemicals, we get a lot more, a lot closer to why we should do it, why we ought and ought not. Now, again, I'm not saying we can get an ought from an is, because you can't. I don't care where you start from. But the self-test that each of us can do is to look and see how we would affect each of these other conscious beings that we believe exist. And if we have empathy, if we care about others, it's very simple to run tests on just about every behavior. I think I missed the second half here. Is that was more focused on the first part as far as saying that we're just chemicals. You said something at the end too, and I was going to address that, but I think I've forgotten. In fact, I know I've forgotten it. So,
I was just taking the implication that if we're taking a reductionist framework of physicalism, right, then that would mean that any of my beliefs are not truly a matter of rational inquiry. They're just chemical, they're just the accidents or results of chemical processes, which it still seems like you're saying, because you're saying the soul is a product of these subatomic substances. So the question is, are these particles that compose people, are they exhaustively causal, or are they inexhaustively causal? Is there some room left for something else to explain what's going on in consciousness?
In essence, what I'm hearing is basically free will. Is that if we're reduced to purely causal reactions to the way that our synapses grow and the chemicals in our brains and everything else interact, then in effect we've lost free will, which I don't know if we have free will. But what I do feel as a human, what I consider to be an independent entity, is that I feel I do have free will. And in the same way that I don't know that I'm not the brain in the vat, and I don't walk off a 100-story building because I'm going to test that and see if I really die. No, for everything that my senses tell me, everything that I've learned over damn near 50 years now, is that the outside world is real and there's ramifications to certain things I do. And if I walk off a 100-story building, the ramification of that's not real good at the outcome, or the outcome's not something I want to occur. Now, could I still be in a simulation? Could I still be a brain? Absolutely, because I know that my senses are not there. So but I act as though I am. So in the same way, if I don't have free will, it doesn't matter, because I'm still going to act as though I do. And it may be, like you said, I'm saying that because of the way the chemicals are fizzing in my brain, to quote Eric. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, my experiences are my experiences. And if they're passive in that I am just kind of or I may not even be a conscious being or whatever, but I'm just along for the ride and I don't have any way of guiding this ship, even though I think I am, okay. Or I am in complete control and everything is there. But as long as everything around me seems to be reactionary to my actions, and I do have the freedom to more or less do anything I want to, I'm going to go with that assumption. And again, it's fair. It is an assumption. It is as much an assumption as God exists. But I think, in my opinion anyway, it's based on better information. Now, again, we can discuss that some other time if you want to. I don't want to get on that little rabbit hole because we can go forever on that. But did that answer both parts of those as far as?
So I think we're getting close to the mark, but we're still missing a little bit here, because okay. I don't think that the freedom of the will or self-control are actually. Again, I don't think they're informative of the objection. And what I mean by that is, even if, and I was actually tacitly granting you that you do have control over what you do, and you play a causal role in the universe. But even if I grant you that, but the objection is that because we are fundamentally these chemical processes, that it is inconsistent with that framework to try and treat these belief systems as if they're anything more than either a chemical process or an accident, a result of that chemical process. But again, and the key thing there is, if that's the case, then this position is by definition irrational. There is no the whole concept.
Okay, but again, Jimmy, I think that you're not taking into account that it seems that what you're arguing for is that we begin and end with chemicals. We, whatever. We can go lower than that or higher than that, but we are basically a sack of chemicals. And if that's all we are, then what does it matter? Am I there? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, but specifically, what I'm saying is, I don't look at a chemical like, let's say that I take out a match, right? And uh, what are those substances called? Well, anyways, I scratch it on the matchbox, and a little flame starts on the end. I wouldn't look to that and start having a conversation with it. It's not a rational
Right, because
being.
but see, that's a great example, because the chemical process there, the product of that chemical process is light and heat. So when you set that set of chemicals in motion, when you have that, the only real product that you get outside of the smoke and the soot and the aftermath of the thermodynamics going on in the middle is light and heat. That's the primary product. What I'm arguing for is that the product of our chemicals is consciousness, is self-awareness, is sentience. And if you look to the laws, the reason the laws are the way they are, the reason we interact in the way we do, is not because it's some physical problem. It's not that when we punish or we reward somebody, it's not because of the physical that we've done, but it's because of the emotional that we've done. And I think that that's best expressed through, well, again, I hate taking it here, but it seems like it always ends up. But look at rape. In the physical sense, especially if it's a rapist that is, let's say, not as violent as they can be, and didn't physically harm the woman. And let's say that the woman was drunk or passed out, because you get that old little thought experiment of, you've got a comatose woman in the hospital, and you've got some guy that goes in and rapes her. What's the crime there? That's a very good question in my mind, where I find it morally repugnant, and I would absolutely convict the guy on the spot. The woman, if she's never aware of it, would really not feel as though she had a crime perpetrated against her. I'm saying she never finds out, either during the process or someone tells her afterwards. I mean, completely is ignorant of it for her entire life. More than likely, she would never feel that any harm was done or anything else. Now, as soon as you tell her that happened, yeah, there's a problem. And that's what I'm saying, is that as soon as we affect another sentient life form, either positively or negatively, that's where morals and ethics start to interact. So even though, yes, the production may be all chemical, just like you're striking the match, it's pure chemical, but we get photons out of it. We get heat, we get energy. That's the production. And our production of our chemical makeup, at least in my opinion, is sentience, is life. Well, maybe not life, but is consciousness, awareness. Does that make it a little bit better?
Well, right, but I guess what I'm arguing here is that when you strike the match, and that's exactly the analogy that I was going for, is there are these accidental energies that come out of that, right? There are these by accidental, I don't mean unintentional, but what I mean is there are these byproducts of striking that match, and that is heat and light, for example, right? These energies that we talk about. In the same way, what I'm saying is, if we're going to be consistent with a physicalist metaphysic, there simply, of this sort at least, there simply is no room to say that the product of our chemical bodies is anything different in physicality than heat from a match or light from a match. It must be mechanical and irrationally causal in the same way that its producers were. If you want to say the opposite of that, then you have to be inconsistent with the metaphysic that you hold. You would have to reject it. Your metaphysic doesn't allow you to have.
Okay, why necessarily can I not get a the product that I'm getting from, our bag of chemicals. Why does that? Why is that? Why does that have to be as? I'm trying to find the right word, because what I want to say here is non-valued as, the heat and light that comes off of the candle or the match. In that the interaction of those photons, the interaction of that heat is definitely going to affect the outside world, but we don't, or like you said, it's purely physical. It's naturalistic, I should say, not natural. Why is it, if we are just chemicals, that we cannot get a more substantial or important, is the only word that keeps coming to mind, product from that? Why does it have to be something as, I guess, benign as light and heat?
I guess what I would say is that when we talk about causality, it would be against what we mean by causes, or another word to use in place of them is explanations, to invoke something that does not explain something to try and explain it. So in the case of physicality, if you want to say that physicality explains non-physicality, that's fine. But then you would have to show how physicality does in fact explain non-physicality.
Okay, but okay, okay. I think I've got it there. See, I think that what you're looking at is consciousness and sentience is being non-physical. I don't think that is. In the same way that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you strike that match, someone may say that the light that comes off that is non-physical. Some people may say the heat that comes off of that is non-physical because they didn't understand the physics behind it. So the product that's coming out of there may be, for lack of a better term, magical to them. It's like, oh my God, look at this cool stuff that creates this stuff called light. Light's not physical. I can't feel it. I can't, it doesn't interact with me in any way.
Right. Real quick, to borrow that analogy, wouldn't you say then that it would be silly for the person to start, I mean, let's say that they thought this was a spirit, right? Let's say, just for the sake of this analogy, there are spirit beings that they knew that they had relationships with, and they knew how to interact with them, right? And the way that they interacted with them is they started these chants, right? Wouldn't you think that it was silly, given the nature of the way the flame actually works, that they would start chanting at it? Now, given that analogy, wouldn't you think that it's silly if you think that consciousness is as physical as a light or a match, that you wouldn't treat it as non-rationally as you would a light or a match?
Well, but going to your first part of the analogy, if they had what they would consider to be some objective evidence or even anecdotal evidence, personal experience of interacting with a spirit, a disembodied mind or whatever it is, and they could tangibly interact with it. They knew somehow, as close to objective knowledge as you could get, that it was as real as the fire, as the stick that they were burning. Then yes, it would be completely rational for them to say, okay, look, we have the physical realm, and then we have a different realm that seems to doesn't rely on the physical. But the difference is, and this speaks to the second half of not, of making the leap, I think is what would probably be the best way to summarize it, of making the leap to saying that consciousness is a physical manifestation, is that when we look from our anecdotal evidence, when we look from what we can observe as humans, every phenomenon that has ever had any explanation has always, without exception, been physical. So to make the inference from that point and say, okay, I'm going to predict that any phenomenon that we run into is going to have a naturalistic cause, because every phenomenon that we've ever had has had a naturalistic clause. Now, I understand the white swan fallacy and all of that, but at the same time, until I have better evidence, I don't think it is irrational at all for someone who has only ever seen white swans, and someone says, what color are all swans? For that person to say white. There's never, I'm not aware of an instance of ever seen a swan that wasn't white. That's pure, that is completely rational. So go ahead.
Let me try to explain the analogy, because I don't think that it has to do with their reasons for believing certain things may work certain ways or others. It has to do with the categorical error that would be imposed with treating a physical thing as working spiritually or non-physically versus treating a non-physical thing and expecting it to work physically, right? So because we know, right, that fire is a physical process. When we talk about striking a match, we're talking about things that are not leprechauns yelling at wood. There's chemical processes going on that we relate to fire. In the same way, it would be silly if somebody started yelling at a matchbox, say, come on fire, come on fire, come on fire. We know that's not going to do anything, because matches aren't spiritual things, right? They're not these they don't have these non-physical mechanics to how they start fires. The concept of a flame is a physical concept. Now, when you talk about consciousness, I'm granting you, for the sake of looking at the inside of your worldview, okay, let's say that consciousness is a physical thing. The problem becomes that if you want to say consciousness is a physical thing, you no longer have the ability, if you want to be consistent at least, if you want to be consistent with your metaphysic, you no longer have the ability to treat consciousness as a rational thing. You must treat it as a physical, mechanical machine, basically. So when I come to you and we have this conversation, if I really wanted to change your mind on that worldview, what I would have to do is I would have to break into your brain chemistry, and I would have to fool around with things. Or even now when I'm talking, instead of thinking about you as this valuable person made in the image of God who has these opinions and who it's my duty to love and express respect for because you are this person, instead of thinking that way, what I should be thinking is, I need to say things as cleverly as possible so that your brain chemistry changes around to make you believe something else, right? That's how you should think if we were going to be consistent with that metaphysic. Because
but by the way, Jimmy, that's exactly how the drugs prescribed by, and I always screw this up, whichever one I pick is going to be wrong because it always is, but psychiatrists or psychologists, whichever one prescribe medications, that's exactly what they do. And we see that manifest exactly in that way, that if we have a chemical imbalance, we are literally unable to reason in the way that we would expect if that balance was normalized. So
wow, that's not true, right? There are many cases in psychology where, say for example, I suffered depression, right? You can use many methods to deal with that. One of them is to go for, there's another word for this, but you can use drug methods, right? Which I did, but you can also use cognitive.
Oh yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's the only fix. And what I would argue is that potentially through the therapeutic methods, through talking, through thinking, through the exercising of, for lack of a better term, the muscle of the brain, which of course is completely wrong, but for the argument, I think it makes sense. Exercising that brain may, in fact, and again, this is not my field, so I'm out on a limb for sure, but it will have a physical change and potentially, or I should have said not will potentially have a physical change as well as a chemical change.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So given that would speak to the physical nature of our spirit. In the same way that we have all of these examples of people who have traumatic brain injuries developing multiple personalities, completely independent of one another. Phineas Gage, probably the most famous example. I mean, he had a not a spike, but a big pry bar ejected through his skull, and had a fundamental change in the person he was before and after that. You talk, all of the witnesses said that he was literally a different person, which would absolutely speak to the physicalness of the brain manifesting what we would consider to be consciousness and our sentience, driven by that, that physical nature.
That seems to be fallacious, right? It would certainly point to its correlation, but it would not point to its causation.
Well, I'm not making the definitive claim that it absolutely is the causation. I'm saying that's my belief, and it's not a, well, maybe you didn't mean it that way. Sorry. It's an information-based opinion. It's not a definitive mandate that this is the case. I'm open to be proven wrong on this. But what I'm saying is that everything that I have ever run into, everything that I have ever seen has had a physical explanation. And to all of a sudden, and what I would consider to be special pleading, is to now say, well, but the soul's different, but the consciousness is different. When we can affect the soul, well, maybe not the soul, but we can affect consciousness. We can affect it. I mean, literally, go drink 3 or 4 beers. It's going to have a marked effect on your conscious, on your ability to remember, to reason, to do anything. So, I mean, something as simple as alcohol can have a completely, some people literally have a change of personality when they drink. They get mean, a mean drunk.
Surely, yeah, definitely. So I'm not arguing about philosophy of mind. I'm not arguing for a dualism, or that our mind or our consciousness is unrelated to physicality. What I'm saying is, when you talk about believing that the world is a construct or composition of subatomic particles and the way that they act and interact, the issue just then becomes, well, things like deciding to light a match, or deciding to go have a bunch of beers, or having this conversation with you, they become irrational activities of these mechanical components, rather than the rational or irrational mental states of beings made in the image of God, right? Those are two very.
But I think where the difference is between us, or where it seems like we're kind of talking past each other, is that it seems that, and I don't know, maybe you're not arguing for this, but it seems like you are, is that if we're just physical and we're, stealing Eric Hoven's deal, pop fizzing, okay, and we're completely along for the ride. Okay, I can see where you're going there, but it doesn't seem from the internal perspective that that's what's happening. Even though the pop's fizzing, we do have control of how the pop fizzes. So if the physical manifestation of this stuff can actually control itself, kind of like Carl Sagan's famous saying of the universe becoming aware of itself. If our thoughts literally have, which it seems to, have an effect on the chemicals themselves, then it's almost a self-perpetuating situation, in that if I don't like the way that the pop's fizzing at this point, then I start to do something different that'll make the pop fizz in a little different way. And if the fizzing pop can control the fizz, then we have consciousness. And I don't see how you can, or anybody can, rule that out as a possibility, especially considering it seems like that's the case.
Well, right, because I don't think control is the issue. The issue is not the ability. So using Hovind's analogy of the fizzing soda bottles, the issue is not the control of the fizz. The issue is the reduction of the controlling of the fizz to the fizz. So given that you have one person who fizzes and thinks that the fizz can control the fizz, and another person fizzing thinking, no, you can't, there's no rational difference between the two. There is simply a physical difference between the two. That's the
Okay,
problem.
but see again, the rationality that, and God, I hate this term. In fact, I don't even want to use it, but I'm stuck. I hate this, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of anything else, and I don't want to be sitting here all night looking for verbiage. The self-emergence of rationality from that fizzing, which therefore affects the next fizz, however you want to keep going with that analogy, is where we're at. Is that?
Well, let me
go ahead.
Let me ask you a question real quick, because I'm trying to understand the analogy. I think something is being assumed here. Are you saying something that is not physical, which you're calling rationality, is coming out of the physical fizzing?
See, again, I would look at,
as soon as you're saying it's physical, then the analogy,
right,
it fails under the same problem.
No, I would look at the rationality as being a product in the same way that a photon is a product of fire.
A physical product, right?
Right. It is a physical manifestation, and what it does is that even though we conceptualize it almost outside, well, not almost, we look at logic, we look at reason, we look at abstract thoughts, mathematics, all of that as kind of residing outside ourselves. In reality, what it seems to me to be is more of a way for the emergence of our consciousness to change that fizzing, or to use that consciousness to better the results. I mean, I think I really screwed. Did that make sense or not? Did it sound like a bunch of...
No, see, I think I understand your point of view, and I would agree that as far as that analogy goes, that's consistent with the physicalism. What we're saying is that in the same way, what's a good analogy for? In the same way that you might have a clock that has two different sections with cogs, and they synergize. That is, one may go first and it starts the other one rolling, and then that one rolls and then starts the first one rolling again. In the same way that those synergize, so can physical things which we would call consciousness, and physical things which we would not call consciousness, synergize.
Right.
But but that doesn't do anything to solve the issue, which is just, okay, but if those things are still physical, and so long as they are physical, then that grants me the right to treat them as any other physical thing, which
because you're ignoring the product. If it was, again, soda fizzing, I don't care if you take a soda pop and pour it on the ground, drink it, throw it into a furnace. I mean, because there's no consciousness. The product is the CO2 that's being released. I don't have a problem with what we would consider to be, from a sentient life form's perspective, harming that CO2. That fizzing doesn't have a product that is valuable to us. Now, when we fizz, we don't release carbon dioxide. I mean, we do when we breathe out, but that's not the product that we're focused on. What we're focused on is the sentience and the reasoning ability of these fizzes. That's what is missing in saying, we don't have to worry about how we treat others, because we're just, we're either all going to die in fatalism and all that, or we're just a bunch of fizzing Coke bottles, and who cares if we hurt each other? Well, because begin and end at the physical, at least from our perspective. From our perspective, when two of these fizzing bottles interact with each other, two human beings interact with each other, there's not just the physical that we're dealing with there from our perspective. It's also our own sentience. It's our own awareness. Now,
but isn't that a physical thing?
Again, that's what I'm saying is why does that necessarily have to be non-physical in the same way light is non-physical?
Okay, because the issue is that we should not treat physical things as non-physical things, and we should not treat non-physical things as physical things. That would be fallacious.
No,
So
I'm saying we treat everything as physical things.
Okay, great. But in that case,
right?
It's necessary to treat consciousness as a physical thing, and that means treating it no differently than, in Hovind's case, he would use the analogy of a fizzing bottle, or in the case of a match, treating it as a match. Now, that's not to say
because there's a
wait. This is what's being misunderstood. I'm not saying the result of that is we mistreat each other. That's not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm pointing out is the implication for truth, the implication for trying to have a correct worldview, trying to be accurate about things, is you completely lose that ability.
No,
because the distinction between someone who believes this position and someone who doesn't is no longer a rational distinction, but merely an accident of chemicals.
Okay, but the belief is not what matters here. See, what I think that what I'm not getting across is that, again, it goes back to the goal. We have a goal, at least I do, of basically doing no harm and hopefully leaving this world a little better for the people who come after me. That's my goal. Now, the reason that I have that goal is because I feel that the manifestation of the physical properties is consciousness, is sentience.
Which is a physical thing, right?
Right. And I value that physical thing in the same way that most people would not walk up to the Mona Lisa and set it on fire. Well, I've set 100 pieces of paper, of parchment, all kinds of stuff on fire. Why would I not do the same thing with Mona Lisa? Because it has a value. It has an intrinsic value. Well, maybe not intrinsic. It has a value to the individual. I value the consciousness, the sentience of other people. Therefore, I'm going to react accordingly. So even though I can say, all right, this is physical. It's a piece of wood. I'll throw it in the fire because I don't care about it. The Mona Lisa, I'm not throwing that in the fire. Not because of just its physical properties. I mean, it's nothing more than oil, paint, canvas, a little bit of wood. I mean, it's nothing. But what it gives me, the beauty that I perceive from that, is its product, is what is produced from that physical manifestation of oil and sticks and whatever. So the thing is in the same way, if I look at the product, the physical product of a human being as being consciousness and sentience and whatever, I'm not going to treat that physical object the same way that I'm going to treat the stick and throw it in the fire.
I think that the equivocation is over the word treat here, and I gotta make sure that I get to bed on time, and I know you wanted to get to bed on time too.
Yeah, so we're coming up on an hour and a half, so
I was gonna interrupt myself and say, hey, do you want to open up the room, or do you want to keep going, or what would you prefer to do?
Well, I'd say we go for. I mean, we're at an hour. We started right just after 8. It's about 9:15 my time. I'd like to hear. I mean, I'll go ahead and post the link. And then that way, anybody in the room that wants to come in can. So while I'm doing that, if you want to address the perceived value of physical, whatever the physical is, physical manifestation, you change it and say money. People won't burn money. Money is meaningless at the end of the day. It's, it really has no value whatsoever. But we don't burn it because we have assigned value. We have a perceived value, in the same way that the product of the fizzing, the human fizzing, in my opinion, is valuable. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to both preserve, extend, and protect that manifestation, that product. That's where my moral foundation comes, and that's where the testing can start. That's where morality can start, and then on a greater sense, then where we can get the ethics and from that end of it. But go ahead and tell me why that doesn't work in your deal while I'm getting get it posted and all of that.
Okay, well, I guess there's a lot that I could say about that. In the last conversation, what I was arguing against was actually the relativistic or subjectivistic nature of that point of view. But what I'm arguing here is simply that when you talk about the Mona Lisa, the source of your valuing that Mona Lisa, I'm not talking about the way you treat the Mona Lisa or the fact that you do value it. What I'm saying is the reason why you value that Mona Lisa, the cause of that behavior, is an irrational cause. It's not a rational agent. It's not an intentional agent. It's not a God who has the universe planned out from beginning to end, from the tiniest molecule to the entire galaxy, such that all of your parts correspond to you, all of your parts follow your own planning. But this is just the voiceless, careless, mindless subatomic particles that compose you, their properties, their actions, their interactions and reactions, all of that's going on. That's what's causing you to value these things. And so, including this belief itself, the position that you hold here, your act of holding this belief, is also causally determined by these things. And so what I'm pointing out is the only difference between someone who agrees with you and someone who doesn't has nothing to do with being right or wrong, has nothing to do with rationality. The only difference on your point of view is that one person happened to have their chemicals interact a certain way, and another person didn't happen to interact with their chemicals a certain way. And so what the issue there then is, there is no longer any anchorage, as it were, to truth. We have disanchored ourselves from truth. We've said, I'm going to hold this point of view. It is irrational, not to say irrational. It's that the question of rationality can't even be answered from the position. Versus a point of view that says, yes, there is actually an answer to the question, what should I believe about ethics? Is there a rational ground for believing things? Is there an obligation to believe the truth about ethics? Right? And I think that the Christian theistic worldview does provide an answer to that.
Well, but I mean, again,
God's commands.
Well, I mean, I don't want to rehash last week, but I mean, when we got to the point where, literally we could not determine right and wrong. I mean, when we get to the point that every action is good, the utility, and I mean that maybe when we come back, next week, because I don't want to keep you any longer than you have to be. But that might be an interesting thing, is to say, okay, now that we've established, where our morals, at least foundationally, where they come from, now we can look at the utility and we can use them. Some people say there's a filter, there's a compass, however you want to say, and see what shakes out. See what using test A versus test B gives us in a practical sense. And again, when you're talking about that, there's no rational foundation for my beliefs versus somebody else's. Again, it comes back to the point of the goal. If we can agree on the goal, then we can agree on everything else, and that's what matters. So if both of us will agree that humanity existing for at least one more generation, because my kids are there, is a good thing, then we can make judgments ethical, moral judgments based on what would best facilitate that. Whereas if we look at it from, let's say, a theistic perspective, I would assume, well, I don't want to get into this because this will really take us down the road, but just to finish my thought, and you don't have to respond if you don't want to, but my feeling is that from a theistic perspective, there's no benefit to the human species existing another generation. In fact, if most Christians had their way, they would like to see the rapture in their own lifetime, and therefore ending humanity, at least as we know it now, through the rapture, and however humanity manifests after that, and the world afterwards or whatever, would be much better than facilitating another generation and another generation and on and on and on. So, but if we can at least agree on the foundation that it is better to have the next generation, we got a goal. That's where the rationality comes in. That's where it makes sense to now start saying, look, man, what you're doing is harming other people. It's harming humanity. And if everybody did it, we would have a real problem sustaining society. Therefore, the human race would suffer. I can make a judgment. On the other hand, if what you're doing is better, hey, we all ought to do it. So that's what I'm saying. Just because you say that my judgments are fizzing manifestations of a brain doesn't change the fact that I do have consciousness. And regardless if that consciousness is real or it's part of a simulation in a computer, it's still, I should say, is physical or just code in a computer. It's still real to me. And as far as I can tell, it's real to most people. So we can make that leap. We can make that assumption that, yes, we're real. Yes, my actions have consequences. And the product of these fizzing bags of meat is consciousness. That's what we value. That's what we protect. That's the rationality from where I'm sitting.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say
I did open the room, so guys, anybody that wants to come in, it should be posted in the comments. So come on in. And Jimmy, go ahead. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah. Good to get some more voices in here. So I just think part of it is, and I noted this when we first started talking, that there's a lot of clarification that has to go underway because both of us come from very different backgrounds. There's a lot of there is a lot of there should be there's certainly a term for this, though I don't know what it is. Yes, I do actually. There's a lot of reactionary. This is another buzzword, but it is factual. There's a lot of reactionary rhetoric in your type of thinking, Ned, because I think you've had a lot of experience with the likes of young Earth creationists who take up a very grocery list apologetic, or the likes of cyclones who also take up a very grocery list apologetics. And so there's a lot of kind of like the private language issue, right? You use the word reality, for example, in a way that's very shaped by these conversations you've had with these other people, or you constantly frame these discussions in terms of this sort of overbearing solipsistic elephant in the background, right? How do we deal with solipsism? Which, by the way, I don't even think is an issue. At least for Christianity, I don't even think that is not hardly a problem. It's like I don't know, but it's not what it's made out to be. I think it's very.
That would be a cool discussion. I mean, I definitely, because solipsism has always been, like you said, it's the bedrock. You get there and you can't get past it. I mean, the hard problem with solipsism to me is, from what I can tell, insurmountable. But if you can get past it, that'd be a great conversation. I'd be very interested to hear that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, based on almost 30 years now of messing with this stuff, my views may be for lack of a better term, dogmatic. And if they are, I want to know, because to me, dogmatic viewpoints are the most dangerous, regardless of what they are. I mean, I don't care if I am right. If F equals ma and it's 100% absolutely reflective of what happens, and I say, okay, in every case, always, at least at the macro level, F equals ma, always. I'm not a scientist anymore. I am a dogmatic Newtonian whatever. I mean, I don't, I'm not exploring anymore. So, I welcome anytime you see me acting in a way that seems non-indicative of being open to a possibility, call me on it, because it's not going to bother me. I guarantee you, I will thank you for it.
Well, I really appreciate the humility, Ned. I think that I wouldn't even accuse you of dogmatism. What I would say is, I think in our conversations, there's a lot of I think you used the word misfire before, that occurs because both of us are just coming from different backgrounds, and so there's a lot of clarification, which is a good thing. But
and again, the first couple of conversations, I mean, it's just like everybody. You got to get to know each other, and you got to understand, so we don't talk past each other using the same word, meaning completely different things.
Which is totally accurate. Yep.
And Jim, if you had something to say, or I got Jim and Jimmy now. That's going to be great.
What's going on, guys?
Not much. How you doing?
Pretty good. I didn't hear the whole thing when you guys first started, but pretty interesting conversation.
Well, thanks. I mean, that's kind of the point. We both are here just to pick each other's brain and try to be interesting to each other, if nothing else.
All right.
I'm glad somebody else find it interesting.
Yeah, it's good to see that you're in here, Jim. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you.
Do you have any points you wanted to bring up, or anything you wanted to discuss, or call us on any of the BS that you hear, if you found any?
Well, I'm just listening. I have some things I could say, but I'm just gonna not.
Well, again, like I said, you're not going to offend me, and I think we're both mature enough here, and Jimmy's good enough at being a rational, good conversationalist, that I don't think it sort of coming on here and just doing ad hom attacks. I don't think either one of us are going to have any problem with at least addressing what you say. We may not be able to answer it, but at least we can try to, and who knows, yours might be more interesting than what we've got. So feel free. I mean, I don't want to close this down, especially considering Jimmy's going to have to leave in 5 minutes or so, or I don't know. Whatever you've got to go, Jimmy, you just let me know. I don't want to keep you at all. So, but if not, then I guess Jimmy, jump right back in, because I mean was.
Well, maybe I'd say I was man, I'm having press give you left and right tonight. What is that word I was looking for? Well, anyways, I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole that you were mentioning, but at the same time I wasn't really sure which part exactly was the rabbit hole. When you were talking about when you were sort of in broad strokes just a few minutes ago going over what was argued in your second video about utility and sort of our standards or informants on making moral choices.
Well, I mean, I guess that again, from my perspective, of course, my side's going to win. I mean, is that right or wrong? I mean, I'm more than willing to start from the premise of I'm wrong. My moral test, if you will, or my methodology for determining, right and wrong is flawed. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that when I put the two against each other and I say, okay, if I'm going to look at utility and I'm going to try to determine an action, so I've got whatever action out there, doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Someone steals a cookie, someone, rapes someone, whatever. Is that wrong? Is that right? From my perspective, my first test is would it harm either the individual consciousness, the product of our fizzing? Would that person suffer? And secondarily, would that action harm humanity? And again, from my belief in naturalism, the ability for humanity to remain a viable species. And the way that both of those actions are weighed are going to be very, very influenced by that filter, if you will. On the other hand, coming from a theistic perspective, if I've got a God and every action that God has ordained happen, I don't think I've got any footing whatsoever to ever make a judgment on anything. I can never know if God used the person stealing or raping or whatever, the examples were. Well, number one, I have to, based on a literal perspective, have to look at those as actions that God mandated, that willed would happen, which by definition must be good. It's reflective of God's will. So the morality, the ability to determine good and bad, evil versus wonderful, the utility becomes meaningless. And that's why I say that from a naturalistic perspective, at least I've got a footing. I can look at an action and make a determination. Whereas from a theistic perspective, especially an omni God that's all good with a plan, I don't see how you can make any determination. And that's what I was saying, that maybe next week we could get and really get into and kind of, ferret that out, because I think that's what it actually ends up being, is we're both looking at this, at least I'm assuming, from more of the utilitarian aspect, or the utility behind it, because at the end of the day, I can have any belief I want to, but if it's useless, who cares? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree that we both want. I think most sane people want a useful belief system concerning ethics. I think that I don't think that I can state better here what my response was before about what I believe is the equivocation necessary to make that objection. But if I could jump over to what Jim wrote in the side chat real quick, because I know I got to take off soon.
Yeah. If you want to read that, because no one else can see it but us, and I actually didn't even notice it.
Good point. Okay, so Jim writes, and Jim, interrupt me if you want to just say it instead. Morals are opinions. They are subject to one's personal taste, i.e., you are judging the behavior of another, hence subjective, i.e., opinion. What is morally right for you is morally wrong for your neighbor. Morality is resolved through consensus of opinion. Good, bad, correct, incorrect, right and wrong are all aspects of morals. They all resolve to opinion. Since some people's morals are different than yours, then who is right and who is wrong? Question: what objective means do you use to resolve this? Answer: there are no objective means. Everyone's morals are different. Morals resolve to that of one's opinion and nothing else. Now, if someone would like to explain to me how morals are objective, then the onus is on them to objectively and unambiguously define this key term, the word that makes or breaks their argument. This is purely an issue of definitions. Morals. This is a subjective concept. It can't be defined without invoking an observer and their opinions. Okay.
To make my response short, I agree. And the only thing that I would substitute instead of opinion are goals, which again are opinions. So that's what my stance is that, and but I'm not going anymore because I'll ramble. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's two issues with this. The immediate issue, Jim, which I pointed out in the last discussion that I had with Ned, is that Where is it? Here it is. This paragraph sentence here. Good, bad, correct, incorrect, right, and wrong are all aspects of morals. They all resolve to opinion. So I would agree that the concept of being accurate about something is a moral concept. That is, the idea that we have beliefs that are rational is not an idea that you can have without morality, because you need the idea of truths being valuable and certain propositions being imperative of belief. Like, for example, an example would be that if I see the equation 2 plus 2 equals 5, I believe that it is obligatory for me to believe that that is wrong, since it is wrong. The state of affairs, the truth of the matter, is imperative. Otherwise, if truth isn't imperative, if being rational isn't inherently valuable, something that I'm obligated to seek, then the idea that I am not inherently obligated to seek rationality is itself not imperative, and then it becomes impossible to distinguish between the affirmation of that proposition, that I ought to seek being rational, and the negation of that proposition, that I not ought to seek being rational. There's no difference. I can't distinguish between the two. So that would be my initial response. But the second part of this, I want to use the appropriate term here, but it's not coming to me. The second part of these paragraphs, where you talk about defining the word, were you referring to objectivity, or were you referring to morals as objective morals?
Top of the line equipment.
Jim, I think that was for you. Were you looking? Well, I'll let. If you didn't hear it, tell him to restate it.
Oh, I was just asking for an objective definition of the concept morals. Objective meaning observer independent.
Okay, so this is the question. Are you asking for the definition to be objective? Like the definition of the word?
Your definition of the word morals objectively. In other words, objectively is what I mean by objectively is observer independent.
Well, that's why I was going to say that seems problematic. If you're asking me for an observer independent definition of something, there is no such thing as a definition that's not observer dependent, right? But that's why I'm wondering: are you asking me to give you a definition of any word? I mean, it could be a specific word.
Just the word morals. The word that makes or breaks your argument.
Okay, and you want this is the question though. Do you want the definition to be objective, or do you want the morality that I'm referring to be objective?
I want the definition of the word morals to be objective, so that I can understand you. How can I understand you? And you have to use it consistently within your presentation.
Right, but that's the point I'm trying to make is if we define objectivity as not dependent upon an observer, then there is no such thing as a definition that is not, or excuse me, because there is no such thing as the definition that's not dependent on the one who's defining the word or stipulating the word, there is no such thing as an objective definition. You can give a definition of a word that refers to something objective, but you cannot have...
Everything just resolves to your opinion then.
Well, but I think last week, Jimmy, and maybe I'm mishearing this, but Jimmy, last week you said that, at least I think you did, that objective morality, in essence, is a reflection of God's will. Would that sum it up?
Right, but that would be the objectivity of morality, not the objectivity of the definition of the word, right? So here's how I would define objectivity. I would say objectivity means something that is an extramental state of affairs. It is not reducible to or in any way essentially dependent upon your thoughts, feelings, opinions, so on and so forth, right? In the case,
I mean, wouldn't that definition outside of God's involvement, or I guess being the observer, so I would say conditionally objective to humanity. If that is the case, if morality and morality, I should say, if morality is nothing more than just being reflective of God's will or God's nature, that seems pretty independent, at least of humanity.
yeah, I would say that is objective. That is a moral realist position. By the way, I am a divine command theorist with respect to what the morals are. That is, I think that God's commands that He gives to people inform us what we are obligated to perform.
Right. So you're on one side of the youth throw dilemma. Basically, God says it's right, period. So, and again, I mean, last week I understood that, but with that in mind, it makes it almost impossible for us to determine, what is right and what is wrong, because in essence, when we understand that everything that happens is part of God's plan, there's no wrong. Everything is right. And that's my big sticking point with trying to understand morality and definitely develop ethics from a state where effectively there's nothing that ever is wrong.
Yeah, I think that I can't answer that better than I already have. But with respect to the utility of objective means, so yeah, I'm not sure I understand.
Well, I guess moving past the because I think we're both at kind of an impasse that, I mean, what and just for the audience, and again, maybe this will help me, because this is what I kind of took away from last week, is what it ended up boiling down to is that even though every communal action, every action that ever happens is good, and God is responsible for those goods, there can be independent actions within those communal actions that, although God is still the one who wrote the script for that and controlled and contrived those occurrences, He is not responsible for that, therefore they can be evil. Did I summarize kind of where you're at on that from last week?
I would say I think it has more to do with the source or agency of the action. So the issue is that I think for the objection, for the second gnome objection to work, Ned, you have to assume that God's determination of my choices, my behavior, my agency, makes Him the agent.
Right.
Means that I can ascribe to Him my agency. Calvinists do not hold that. Calvinists believe that God determines my agency, but that doesn't mean you can replace me with Him as the agent. You cannot ascribe to God my actions just because He determines me to do them. You can ascribe to God, you can attribute to God the determination of me doing an action, but you cannot attribute to God the action itself. That would be an equivocation.
And see, Jimmy, that would make perfect sense if you did have the ability to not do what God had prescribed, because then free will comes back into it, and you have a choice, either to follow God's will or to, rebel. But and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from a Calvinistic perspective, we don't have that freedom. We cannot choose to not do what God told us or ordain us to do.
But again, my response to that is just, okay, why must I be able to Why is it the case that I must be able to do other than what God determines in order to make the distinction that I did between his determination and my action that he determined?
Because if you're not, then the robot analogy that we did last week, basically I can make a robot, or not yet, but presumably someday we'll have technology that can make a robot that would feel that it's making these choices independently, when in reality it is literally following a line of code that mandated it do whatever it's doing. And it may be, dumb, fat, and happy, so to speak, in making those quote unquote choices and believing that it is, but in reality, it is playing out a script. It is doing exactly what it is. Now, if I program that robot to believe it's acting independently, but according to the script, according to the program that I have written, it kills somebody, I don't think anybody out there would lay blame on the robot. The ultimate blame would be mine, even though the robot feels that it's independent. And
right.
Go ahead.
Right, but the issue that I have with the analogy is that, and that's why I went for the author analogy, because I think it's a better one. In the case of Calvinism, the will of the creature, or the agency of the creature, has been understood hedonistically. That is, everyone always does what it is in their greatest desire to do. Now, God programs people with their greatest desires, but we always do what we want to do. So it's not that the robot does things thinking that it's not caused by God. Calvinists are not saying that. What we're saying is, robots, we are robots. We do what we want. We do whatever it is our greatest desire that we want. God is the creator of all facts and reality, and that includes my desire and my action. But as far as my agency and his agency, it would simply be.
But again, just like the author, as an author writes, and like you said, prescribes these desires. Let's say, I don't know, David and Bathsheba. God prescribed for David to desire Bathsheba. Okay. In the same way that if I'm writing that narrative, I make my protagonist desire whoever my the woman is in that. But the pinning of that is my doing. I'm the one who is instilling that desire. And that
But you're not the one desiring the woman, and it would be silly to ascribe to you that action.
But again, if that is the driver, if I'm prescribing, if I am giving someone that desire, if I'm endowing them with that feeling, who was the cause of that feeling? I was.
There are many causes of the feeling, right?
No, because no. There's one cause for everything.
See, I pointed out, and I got to take off here, but I pointed out many times, and I tried to make this as clear as I possibly could. Calvinism does not hold that God is the only cause for any effect, or that God is the only explanation of any event. That's not, and that's why I kept pointing out. I don't think that this is that
definitely got past me, because my understanding is that everything that happens, will happen, can happen, is by God. There's nothing that happens beyond his will.
Okay. So to make a classical distinction here between necessary and sufficient causes, Calvinism holds at least that God is necessary and sufficient for Calvinism holds that God is necessary for the occurrence or existence of anything. You cannot have that existence there without God, and that goes for everything individually. It's not a deistic framework where God is responsible for the first event and then everything follows. It is that the entirety of history is something for which God is responsible. But that's not to say that God is a sufficient cause. God has built the universe so that without the internal explanations that he has set up, it would not be the same thing that is being created. In other words, Jimmy's discussion with Ned that is caused just by God is a different discussion than Jimmy's discussion with Ned that is caused by God and many other causes which God also created.
Okay. Well, and again, that's where I'm really confused, and I don't want to get into it because, like you said, you got to go, and I mean that's another hour. So I think since it looks like we're kind of winding down, let's just cut it here, and we can kind of speak amongst ourselves. But if you want to pick it up again and kind of look at more of, I'd definitely like to pick your brain on that, and maybe we to not bore everybody because I think we kind of just go back and forth. Maybe we can do that privately. But next time we come together, whenever you have some time, because next week I'm out of town, so we can't do it next Friday. I'm glad I remembered that. But in fact, I'm not going to say, I'll be at a college, so I'll be doing something there. But the following week I should be back, and I think I'm available for about the same time. If you wanted to kind of get into the utility behind both of our points of view and just kind of see how we can make moral distinctions, because that's the thing I'm still struggling with. That's the other thing that I'm struggling with from your perspective is that, how can you make a determination? And you may be struggling with mine. And hopefully, well, I don't know if say hopefully you are, but it'd make it more interesting if you were. Put it that way. So.
Well, yeah, and like I said, I'm here to enjoy the discussion. I appreciate the conversation that you offer, Ned, and the interest and humility that you bring to the table. And I always want to throw out there, because I think some Christians almost try to be cruel. Cy Ten Bergenkate is a good example. I think we almost want to be cruel or surreptitious about their agenda. But I'm just being honest here. Like, I am not here just for intellectual conversation, but hey, I do think that both of us need to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. Else we're going to be in trouble. Which and take it as you will.
Well, no, and to be just like I was at Oral Roberts, if that's the case, you're absolutely right. That absolutely is an ought. At least if I want to prosper in the afterlife and I want to have a nice time. So you're absolutely right. If that is the case, then I would expect nothing else from a moral perspective than you to try to show people that, hey, look, guys, you're going to suffer quite a bit if you're wrong on this. So, yeah, I don't understand. And as far as the vitriol and the, condemning of people, man, as much as I'll agree with you that Cy and there's other people that do that, from the atheist side, it is at least as bad, if not worse. And I probably could rattle off 20 names right now. But I have no use for that either. I think it completely sidelines the discussions and turns us into nothing but just name calling. It's juvenile playground antics of, I know you are, but what am I? And you're this, and you're a duty head, and you're this. And, my 5-year-old can argue better than that. So, yeah, that's why I keep talking to you, Jimmy, because you seem to, number one, want to figure out what's true. And number two, care about other people enough to put yourself out there and say, hey, guys, I think this is right, and I'm trying to help you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I really, and I know I mess up as a human being, but I really hope that that's what I stand for, because
don't get into that. That's one of the things I hate worst about Calvinism in particular, as far as the self-deprecating position it mandates that you guys have to be in. That drives me crazy, because again, in my opinion, every time you do that and every time you honestly feel that way, you're losing part of your life. And in the same way that if you're right and I don't, come to that realization, I'm going to have problems. If I'm right and you're losing every second and every minute in, the pain of feeling like you're unworthy and feeling whatever, and that I hate that. Because I care about people and I want you to live a good life just like everybody else. So, but anyway, I don't want to keep you because we're way past time, and I appreciate you staying. So we'll talk offline and see what we can get together again.
Cool. All right, Ned.
All right, bud. Thanks again. I'm cutting it right now. Good night, everybody.